What else can I say? Let me try it with this bit. If one traces the origins of the history of the global, one finds that technology and innovation have played a major role. Indeed, among the issues, concepts, frameworks, interests, and perspectives that had shaped history of the global thus far, and also today and yesterday in all the talks, technology and innovation emerge as pivotal agents. In its basic forms and seemingly general applicability, technology is conceived of as a global phenomenon. Farming and textile production, metallurgy, ceramics, hydraulics, and architecture can be found in many cultural spheres. Furthermore, technology and its advance gave the world its globality. The telescope discovered it, navigation verified it, and cartography manifested it. The development of technologies made it possible for the world to become what modern minds generally assume to be global. Through enhanced transportation and communication, societies and individuals, continents and regions interacted with increasing intimacy, first materially, then intellectually, by way of travel and trade, then virtually by way of internet technology. Let me call a halt here to point out how insidiously the cross-cultural history of technology within one short paragraph has become an inter- or trans-cultural history of technology. The focus has shifted from a view of technology in many cultures to its dissemination from one culture to another. The cross- and intercultural formats of technology serve the agenda of ground historical accounts in two ways. Firstly, they are used as tools to indicate development or stagnation. And secondly, as a characteristic, they serve to argue for both diversity and unity. Put into chronology, these two functions of technology make the world historically explode from a few original yet flat joint features, such as basic skills and attitudes, into an orb of diversity, before it then implodes again to a new global world of uniform features. The global world becomes the world of globalization. What my caricature does not take into account is that throughout the attempts to write global history, the history of technology has gone through a significant methodological shift. In the wake of social constructivism, historians have become increasingly aware of the situated and negotiated character of technology. And yet, while the phenomena of technology, and in particular its innovations, thus emerge as historically and culturally multidimensional endeavors that, as David Edgerton reminds us, may well be detached from each other in both global and globalized contexts, they remain one-dimensional at the conceptual level. Both technology and innovation adhere mainly to a general Western perspective, a perspective which occurred in and is represented by a few model countries, usually France, Germany, Britain, and Italy from the 19th century. While studies of all kinds meanwhile appreciate that Chinese, Indian, or Persian cultures, to name but a few, had scientific and technological knowledge, few appreciate in the global context that both scientific knowledge and technological knowledge in these contexts also had its own historicity of how this knowledge was included into their culture. What were the argumentation strategies of Chinese, Persian, or Indian cultures? Which role did these cultures assign to texts, artifacts, and persons in the formation, evaluation, and transmission of technological knowledge? And which effects did these notions have historically on their ups and downs? Seen from this point of view and this perspective, the history of technology still lacks the experience and concepts, as well as a basic understanding of the cultural appearances and implications of both technology and innovation. Namely, it lacks the intercultural perspective to account for a history of the global. Or conversely, the history of the global thus far suggests that in some respects we need to be more interested in what our theories do not tell us than what they do. A major challenge of research with a global perspective is, as my predecessors have already emphasized, a distinct awareness on the categories we use. An example for this are the terms culture and cultural, which I have already used several times. In fact, I'm quite suspicious of their meaning when used in discussions in global, and especially when combined with the prefixes of cross, trans, or intra. In all its flexible vagueness, culture defines a particular group of people who shared an elementary body of knowledge and values at a particular time. In this definition, culture blurs identifications of empires and nations, tribes, people, and regions. As for the Chinese region, which I know most about, culture is thus a suitable term. It concomitantly presupposes that a society ruled by or affiliated with the Sung, Yuan, Ming, or Qing dynasty, roughly the period from the 10th till the 18th century, by tributary relationships or for ethnic, geographical, or other reasons, agreed on a basic understanding of what technology was and how it should be assessed to make a diffusion, a sharing, or an exchange possible. At the same time, when it comes to a closer identification of shared knowledge and values, cultures are much smaller units, which can be formed by the people inhabiting a geographical region or places such as the city of Hangzhou in 16th century Ming China, even 1645 or whatever, or 1456 or whatever you want, or a special social group herein, such as the craftsmen or even the local community of the oil presses. This is what forms what Pamela Along and others have defined as cultures of knowledge. This distinction is necessary also because the last decade of Chinese studies has brought about an increasing awareness of the changing content and local character of what grant accounts generally summarize as Chinese. This is what Arbin Wong already mentioned. Studying the ways in which this part of the world dealt with technology, how they conceptualized it in writing, or the practices and ideals they developed, augments the notion of a changing Chinese culture that embraces multifarious cultures of knowledge whose basis was subject to quite individual definition. A landscape of diversity that has hitherto no role and place in the history of the global. What should one do to explore this landscape of diversity, and how should one proceed? My method is to look at the way in which knowledge about products and its making, broadly speaking, technology and techniques, were discussed and treated in the various cultures of China, how they were appropriated, and what conclusion could be drawn on this basis as to conceptual approach. Doing this, I want to detect the practices which signify a major concern in technologies and that assign technology a place and a function in statecraft, public and individual life, or scholarly achievement, as a body of fact and hypothesis, the product of a specific labor or a belief. As such, idiosyncratic sets and subtle strategies of appropriating practical knowledge emerge that are manifest beyond normative frameworks. Instead, they become apparent in the way in which officials organized production and documented this organization, and what practices surrounded these objects or notions of professions. An example for this is the appropriation of silk and porcelain in administrative contexts, and this is just a simplified example. On the conceptual level, Chinese dynasties treated silk and porcelain as political tools and means of power. Most explicitly did this the Ming dynasty. As the veritable records of the Ming reveal, the emperor and ministers discussed the management of silk and porcelain, its production rate and best usage almost weekly at the court. For negotiating power, similar to the European principalities or kingdoms discussing military armament or the maintenance of city walls. Nevertheless, global accounts identify silk textile technology, for example, just as an advanced skill of Chinese culture or history, or as an economic relevant luxury good. A focus on appropriation also anticipates that there are various individual relations to and notions of technology. namely by revealing the way in which a craftsman made use of his skills and knowledge. Indeed, I presuppose that the craftsman, in whatever context he lived, had an essential interest in protecting what secured his or her life. Written documentation in Chinese culture reveals such traits as a counter-reaction to state, elite, or administrative intervention. Practices circling around objects such as ritual, but also issues such as the marking of wares, are an indication of the varying relationships set at a particular time between the producer and the object, the maker, the owner of the technology, and all other parties involved. Allow me to illustrate this point with some broad brushstrokes of what my research has brought out. These first investigations suggest that markings were not arbitrary. Producers' names were written, carved, engraved, sealed, or stamped into lacquer or silver and woven into textiles from the Song to the Qing dynasty, often elaborating in great detail on the relation between the object and its producers or owners. Porcelains as well as ceramics, lacquerware, sculptures, wall paintings, silver furniture, silk boats, it could go on, are signed with names of institutions and personal names, such as produced by Zhang de Min, produced by the Zhang clan, or they are signed by just a marking. Material traces and some steles show that the usage of marks was subject to both fashions and, of course, local trends that the written account almost entirely neglects or discusses in ways that we still have to understand. Potters of I Ching wares from the late 16th century, for example, imitate stamps and assign their work in this way as an art. Dehua potters, in contrast to that, apply marks with individual names or referring to family enterprises by imitating the forms of imperial marks, showing that they are more interested to attach to the quality of imperial marks, or imperial wares, sorry. Another view to the individual is given by the particular strategy of scholars, which means the elite and literate class to include technologies and practical knowledge or reflect on technology and its innovation in written account. Looking at Chinese writings on technology in its broad contextualization, I suggest one has to make a clear distinction between the technology that happened in China at a particular moment and in a particular space, and the writing about it. In writing and historicizing and tradition building was an important strategy of scholars to include technological affairs and its products into their world, whereas the identification of individual craftsmen, for example, was not, or their knowledge. Thus, writings shaped what I would call linear developments rather than documenting them. Applications to the past and the construction of a long tradition connect to the Chinese idea that tracing the origin of a thing or an affair, it's called wuyuan in Chinese, knowing a thing's relation to other issues was quintessential for knowing in general. Writing on the origin of things, literati drew important and changing relations between things and their making. Just one example. As my colleague Martina Siebert has researched, Chen Qi and his colleagues in the 10th century still classified the south-pointing carriage under the rubric of carriages. By the 13th century, most accounts classify it as an issue connected to needles, similar to compasses or embroidery. In this way, scholars identified a connection also between pottery and cooking, and one that, as a constructed item, belonged into the context of house construction and the definition of space. A multitude of other issues appear, such as the Taoist notions of yin-yang and the making of bows and arrows. These accounts on the origin indicate that development and evolution were a central issue in the Chinese reception of technology, a development that required contextual embedding. These accounts, however, also show that scholars regarded innovation as of minor importance. Or we could also say Chinese scholars dealt with innovation in the awareness that it, like all other kinds of knowing, emerged from an already apparent pre-existing bits and bytes of knowledge floating around, never unconnected to what was already there. This, at least, is an insight modern innovation studies have just started to emphasize. What strikes me is the fact that the field of non-Western technology in global history is only rarely inhabited by historians of science or those of philosophy, epistemology, or thought, but mainly taken on by historians of economy and anthropology, and I have nothing against these disciplines. As if there was a qualitative distinction between the technology that was described in European cultures in comparison to what Chinese, Arabian, Japanese, or Persian, or whatever other scholars at the same time wrote about their craft, agriculture, and technology, and certainly also scientific knowledge. Or as if those who research such issues with regional focus refuse to engage with global accounts. In fact, we thus do not know the trajectories of technology that formed the civilizations before Western ideals formed the historical account. And to conclude, and I can't resist this conclusion, I suggest that a better understanding of Chinese, Arabian, and all other cultures' concepts could provide a new view to when, where, and why technology and innovation actually happened, and how it was written down. Writing the history, or settled down, I should probably say, not only written down. Writing the history of the global from the perspective of these questions would challenge many of our current assumptions. It would also offer, I admit, a less structured and much more non-linear development, no easy solutions, and probably no pathways. On the other hand, it would reveal knowledge production as the consequence of systemic and individual dynamics, influenced by a huge range of historical possibilities and culturally driven choices. Thank you very much.